All right. Well, I think we are recording and live streaming and ready to go. So I'll kick us off. Hello, everyone. I'm Sylvia Chiborowski. I'm going to be helping to facilitate these rulemaking advisory committee meetings. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining. This is the first rulemaking as part of the Department of Land Conservation and Development's effort to update rules related to housing in unincorporated communities. In a moment, I'll go over today's meeting purpose, agenda, lead a round of introductions from you all. But first, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Brenda Bateman, the department director, to welcome you all. So over to you, Brenda.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm going to have the Memorial Conference Room go on mute for a minute. Thank you all. Good morning. My name is Brenda Bateman. I'm the director of the Department of Land Conservation and Development. I just wanted to take a moment of time before you get started with your material this morning to thank you for your time and your expertise and contributing those to the work here today. I know everybody's very busy and this is a significant investment on your part. So I wanted to tell you that we're very grateful and we're glad to have your perspective and your thoughts with us this morning. As you know, Oregon's housing needs are urgent. And so we're very interested in looking at this particular slice of the work and seeing whether there might be additional opportunities for housing production here in communities where, of course, housing is sorely needed. And I just wanted to take a moment to address a few concerns we've already heard before we've even gotten started here with our work today and lay out a few pieces of information that folks might find helpful or comforting as they're participating or watching this discussion. First of all, this discussion will reside within the bounds of the law and specifically within Division 22 of our department rules. These are existing provisions that already allow for planning and zoning in unincorporated communities. So that's something that's allowed today. And this conversation will just further explore what additional residential development in those areas might look like. Relatedly to Division 22 and Division 4 of our rules lay out provisions for expanding unincorporated community boundaries should that become necessary or needed. And this process will also help communities explore what that would look like. Third point I wanted to make is that this is voluntary. And so there's no requirement here for counties to even change the programs that they have with regard to unincorporated communities. But should they choose to, this will help, I think, figure out next steps and what those conversations with their communities might involve. Because that's my fourth point. If communities do change their unincorporated community programs, that would be a public process for them. And that would involve community engagement, community involvement. So there will be opportunity for additional voices and perspectives as we move through these conversations at the local level. Finally, I just wanted to note that development in unincorporated communities must be supported by adequate facilities and services, meaning things like sewer, water, transportation. And so this comes with, and this requires additional support and additional infrastructure that we might all be looking for as a support for this housing. So you're in very good hands here with a skilled facilitator in Sylvia and with technical support from our DLCD staff. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of your conversation. And again, thank you for your service on this RAC. Sylvia, back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Brenda. John, do you mind popping up the slides? And as John pops up the slides, I'm just going to go through our meeting agenda and a few logistics pieces before we lead through a round of introductions, get to know everyone a little bit, and start to get on the same page. All right, we can just start with slide 2 here. So for today's meeting, our topics, we're going to start with, again, just some introductions from you all so that you get to know each other. We can learn more about what brings you to the table here. And then we'll get into this committee's charge and expectations for how you all work together to provide input on the rule changes, and appreciate the way that the director laid out, what is going to be included in those rules and the kinds of information that you're going to be providing input on. And then DLCD staff will go through just really tip of the iceberg pieces on the rules under consideration. Now, the rules are dense in depth, so we're not going to be able to answer every single question today, but definitely want to provide that overview of information, and we'll get into more details at future meetings. And we have then time for plenty of rec discussion. There are a few discussion questions that we're going to pose to you to start getting your initial thoughts, knowing that you probably have not gone into the rules yet in a lot of depth, but just getting kind of initial thoughts and providing time for your comments and questions about the process as well. Today will probably feel like a lot more information out talking at you, and we expect future meetings to be really more sort of full on discussions as much as possible. And maybe, yeah, before we go into the next slide, also just a reminder of your meeting packet. So you got an email last week, and that included all of your materials for today. So that included the agenda, list of members for the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, your operating guidelines, which we're going to go over today, and then also the staff report that went to the commission. And this report really lays out the background for this rulemaking, why it's happening, and your charge. It also lists the unincorporated communities in Oregon, so that's good background information. And of course, the packet included the relevant rules, divisions 22 and 4 that we'll be talking about. So next slide. Just a few reminders on remote participation guidelines. I know that everyone is in Zoom meetings all the time, but just some reminders. For RAC members, it's helpful if we have your full name for the record and for the participant list. So if you find your name in the participant list and just rename yourself to first, last name and your organization and put RAC behind your name, that just kind of helps us keep track. We appreciate it if you can stay on mute when you're not speaking and use video to the extent possible so we can pretend like we are in the same room together. And when we get into discussion and Q&A, just use the raise hand button to get into the queue to speak. So the raise hand button should be at the very bottom black bar of your Zoom screen. It's sometimes hidden under something called reactions. And I don't think there's anyone joined by phone only, but if you are joining by phone, just press *9 to raise your hand. And for members of the public that are watching the live stream, thank you for joining, listening in today. We do not have a public comment period at these RAC meetings, but public comment will be considered through the public comment period, and that's going to be starting in November. I'll go through that in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. Next slide. So here, I just wanted to introduce or recognize the core staff that you'll be working with throughout the course of these meetings. And maybe I'll let you all say a quick hello, starting with John.
Good. Thank you, Sylvia. Good morning. I'm John Jennings. I'm the Department of Community Services Specialist, and as I said, I'm kind of co-leading, working on this project with a lot of support and help from other folks. And there are some folks that are also kind of in the conversation that aren't listed here. We call them our HAPO Nation, which isn't in relation to Brock Nation. But there's a few things there, and I wanted to point out that many of our regional people are involved in this conversation, and we really value that input. They're the ones that know the most about how things are shaping up on the land. So thank you, and I'll hand it to Palmer and then Angela and Suri. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. Palmer Mason. I'm the interagency coordinator at DLCD, and I'm co-piloting this rulemaking with John. Although, as John indicated, we have a full team at DLCD and Sylvia supporting us. So thank you all again for your participation and joining us, and I'll pass it over to Angela.
I'm Angela Williamson, the assistant or coordinator for this rulemaking. What you need. Suri just came back from a dentist appointment this morning, so she is our senior rules coordinator. I will go ahead and introduce you. She's not just speaking at the meeting. She's here also.
Thank you, Angela. And you may have noticed that she's been, kind of the person you've heard most from, and will continue. And she's been absolutely instrumental in this process so far. That's very. Commissioner Bennett, would you mind introducing yourself real quick?
Good morning, everyone. And I want to echo Director Bateman and everyone else. We really appreciate you committing this time to this piece, the unincorporated community discussion. Just quickly, for those that don't know you, along with being an LCDC commissioner representing Eastern and Central Oregon, I'm a retired Baker County, I don't know, multiple terms commissioner, and having served also as a county administrator and a city administrator and a planning director, I've had considerable experience working with unincorporated communities. I look forward to working with you. Please always feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is easily available, and I really love talking to you because that way I can hear your voice and carry it forth to the commission. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you all. And I'm Sylvia Tuborowski, facilitator with Mosaic Resolutions. So again, this is your team. If you have any questions or need anything, reach out to any of this core staff. Okay, with that, we can get into RAC member introductions. If you go back one slide. So I'd love to just go around the table, hear from you all, just see who's in the room. And we have a few just initial questions to start to get to know each other. So would love if you could just share, your name, organization, kind of the interests that you represent, and then, what you hope to achieve through this rulemaking process, right? You heard a bit and you've read a bit about the types of rules that are being considered and the need for housing and potential voluntary changes that could occur in unincorporated communities if communities so choose. So, what is your hope out of this process? Whether it's a process piece or maybe a substance piece, what you hope outcomes are on the ground years from now. And then something that you see as a challenge. Maybe it's a challenge that you expect in the conversation here in the room, or a challenge that you expect outside of this room through the political or public process, or with implementation, but just any kind of core challenge. And then also, what would you hope to learn from others around the table, right? This is a committee process. You are providing input to DLCD, but we also expect you all to be hearing and listening to one another. So, what expertise or information do you hope to learn from others here that you may not already know yourself? So kind of those 4 key questions. And I don't want to leave them on the screen because I want to be able to see everyone's faces, but we don't have the chat available. So maybe write those down real fast if you can't get them, or I'll repeat them again later on as we move on, but I don't want to have to say them every time. But I'm going to go through my list of RAC members that are here and just go in alphabetical order. And if you don't mind, so I'm going to start with Brandon, if you don't mind going first, and then after that over to Bryce.
Right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. So I don't have a camera, but we're working on that part. I'm Brandon Reich. I'm Marion County Planning Director. So I've been with the county for 26 years, and I worked with our unincorporated communities quite a bit. The phrase I think that I'd have would be, I hope that our unincorporated communities can have a future. So I'm looking for them to be able to have a future, be able to continue and grow. The sentence I think that's the biggest challenge, I think, is really ensuring that these rules would work for all counties, or at least almost every county. They're fairly complex. It's a complex situation, so making sure that happens. I hope to learn about the different challenges that communities are facing and what their needs are. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Over to Bryce.
Good morning. I'm Brees Edwards. I serve as the Historic Preservation Manager for Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. So as that might kind of shadow, I am looking at this process through a unique lens of cultural resources. And with that, I'm hoping to bring in a perspective of planfulness for resources while we, step into this conversation about some very real needs. With that, Grand Ronde's historic lands span, ceded by treaty, go from the California border to the Columbia River. So this area today is about 2/3 of the state's population. So very familiar about what housing needs and associated pressures look like on the landscape, and hope to navigate through a planful process that is staged for a long future, that don't make resources in competition, but actually make them complementary. So that's a challenge. And I'm looking forward to learning about what this process is going to look like as we, step into this and stage for the next generations of this state. So thank you.
Thank you, Brees. Let's go next to Darren and then Eric Walker.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I'm Darren Murphy. My company is called North Development. I focus on affordable housing development around the state, most of which is in rural communities. I'm hoping to get out is I think to shed more light on the challenges and opportunities in unincorporated communities. I think there's a lot of difference between unincorporated communities. Some are set up better for housing development, others probably not so much. So just learning kind of the differences between the communities around the state. I think one of the challenges is going to be we're facing decades of kind of status quo, and how do we sort of move that efficiently? It's always hard to change when we've been doing the same thing for many, many years. So it'd be interesting to see how that can come about. And then from other members, just hoping to learn about some of the challenges and successes that have happened to date. I know that there's probably been some successes and probably a lot more challenges. So just learning more about that would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Darren. And Eric?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Walker. I serve Hood River County as its Community Development Director. I've been with the county for about 28 years. I hope that the RAC process achieves some additional opportunities to develop and grow more efficiently within existing unincorporated communities where it's needed most, while continuing to maintain lands with the highest resource value. I think the biggest challenge facing this group is finding reasonable solutions that will address everyone's hopes while still upholding the overall principles of our statewide program. And then, like others, I hope to learn from each other's experiences and possibly apply some of that knowledge as in our case, Hood River County is going through the process of adopting an unincorporated community plan for one of our final communities, which is Odell. And it's been quite a process where we've been at it for almost 23 years to ultimately adopt a plan for Odell. And that delay is due in part to some of the challenges that this group will be talking about. So I hope to learn from others and their experiences. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. And I'll hand it over to Gail and then to Marcus. And just a reminder of the questions, it's kind of name, who you represent, what you hope that this process achieves or just hopes that you have for this Rulemaking Advisory Committee. And third is challenges that you think will come up. And fourth is what do you hope to learn from others at the table. So over to you, Gail.
Hi, thank you. I'm Gail Henriksen. I'm the Community Development Director for Clatsop County. And we've recently, a couple of years ago, did some changes regarding housing product and housing types and lot sizes in our unincorporated communities. And it was more of a brute force and awkwardness exercise than something that was very nuanced. So I think that in terms of what I'm hoping that we can get out of the RAC process, I'm hoping that we get some good common sense recommendations that will be easy to implement and that are really going to result in housing production in our unincorporated communities. In terms of the biggest challenge I think we'll face, I think from my perspective, it's making sure our recommendations are nuanced and fit different communities. I don't think that we'll be able to always come up with a one size fits all, because I think our unincorporated communities do have unique characteristics that we need to be cognizant of. And then finally, pretty much like everybody else has said, I'm really looking to learn what other communities are facing in terms of opportunities and constraints with getting housing in their unincorporated communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. And Marcus?
And ich Meitsky in me in Kaima. My name is Marcus Luke, housing director for Umatilla Tribes. We're kind of seem like the only tribe I see on here with a bunch of big guns from the state of Oregon. I've been working for the tribe for 26 years. My challenge is basically two things. One is rural development versus urban development. The process is in between. The other one is the uniqueness of each tribe in the state of Oregon. Our development process is a little bit different than reason why I say that is because we have actually a Veterans Elders Grant from Oregon Housing Community Services. We're going through that process, and it's a challenge. It's kind of, I don't want to say upside down, but it's kind of upside down how we develop, just because of the fact we have our own policy, our own codes, our own planning. We're basically a tribal government within a government itself. So I think the challenges for us is that specifically because we're wanting to, it's been excellent partnership with the state of Oregon, starting with both Kotek and before that with Brown. So, we're Oregonians as well. So I think we're all on the same page, and I'm grateful to be here to kind of see how things operate at your level and kind of see how that deciphers down to each development community. Each one of us have different needs. Each one of us have the similar processes, but a little different. So I'm here to kind of just soak in some information on what can bring back to my team. We have a development team. It's not just myself. We have Public Works, Finance, OLC, our attorneys basically, and Public Works. So we have a development team in one room. We go over each development. And so it'd be interesting to see how others operate as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. Now let's go to Mary Kyle and then Matt Cyrus.
Hi, thank you, Sylvia. I'm Mary Kyle McCurdy, the Associate Director and Managing Attorney at 1000 Friends of Oregon. My hope is that we are governed by and start with an understanding of pretty fundamental, essential information about the housing needed in the various rural unincorporated communities, their buildable land, and their infrastructure status, and that we have that basic information before going forward. For me, the challenge is that we jump instead, right, to opening up areas for housing that don't have the infrastructure capacity and or are located in areas of natural hazards, and I include in that wildfire and drought. And that we end up with housing that is not accessible, or is only accessible, I should say, to those of higher incomes, second home, short-term rentals that are not serving the housing needs of those in that particular rural area. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Kyle. And Matt?
Yeah, my name is Matt Cyrus. I'm a sixth-generation Central Oregon farmer, president of Deschutes County Farm Bureau, as well as the chair of the Deschutes County Planning Commission, and 35 years experience in wildland firefighting, as well as done some development. Primary interest, and I should clarify, I'm not representing the organizations I'm a member of, but primary interest is in seeing what opportunities might be available in some of the unincorporated communities. Challenges certainly is the perpetual appeals and delays caused for any kind of development of any kind. And I'm looking forward to seeing what options might be available and what other people's perspectives are. We've got a couple of unincorporated communities in Deschutes County that we're currently working with and looking towards some long-range plans for those communities. So looking forward to seeing where we go with this.
Thank you, Matt. And then over to Megan Tuck.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Tuck. I am with Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council, the Council of Governments and Economic Development District for our region. I'm also a member of DLCD's Community Involvement Advisory Committee as well. One of my hopes for this process is, just thinking through some of the opportunities for, or what are the opportunities to create thriving rural communities, and think about some maybe creative solutions to housing development. One challenge that I could foresee is how we think about balancing some of the infrastructure needs of these communities and their ability to develop and those demands. And then I'm really interested to learn what are some of the different resources or tools available to support our unincorporated communities and counties with some of those development challenges and long range planning. So thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Did I miss any Rulemaking Advisory Committee members in the introductions?
Yeah, in the room.
We have some in the room.
Oh, perfect. Let's go to the room. I can't tell who's there, so maybe John, if you can help.
Yeah, so thank you guys. And some folks are off camera a little bit, which is fine. So maybe we just kind of start on this side and go like this, if that works for folks.
Tabitha Eck, Executive Director of McKinsey Community Land Trust, or McKinsey CLT. I represent a 60 miles of unincorporated community that is connected by the McKinsey River and most notably devastated by the 2020 fires. So my hope from this group and the work we do here is that we will find a pathway and tools for communities, unincorporated communities, to rebuild and revitalize themselves. And the challenge will be the complexity and the layering involved in land use in unincorporated communities. Federal, state, and counties weigh in. What I hope to learn is from the challenges and opportunities of my peers and where we might have a collective voice to bring those to a higher level that will result in the hope of tools to rebuild ourselves.
Hey everybody, Rock Nation, I'm the policy director at Oregon Realtors. I think my one word to hope to get out of this rack would be production. If you've been beyond other racks, that will not seem inconsistent at all. I think the challenges that we might face here are very similar to ones that we face when we're planning for urban housing, infrastructure obviously being one, land capacity, process, timelines. But looking forward to learning from all of you how we kind of bring all those things together to create better communities and more housing for people in urban unincorporated areas.
Hi, my name is McCrae Carmichael. I'm the interim executive director and the community and economic development director for the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments, which is Marion, Pope, and Yamhill counties. I think what I hope we have here is an openness and flexibility of conversation, thinking about what can be. As Darren shared, we've had decades of how we've been, and I think we're at this junction where we're trying to see how we can be different. So I hope that we can really listen with each other and bring forward ideas. I have been the planner through the Beachy Creek fires up in with Brandon online with Marion County. So the impacts of our smaller cities and unincorporated areas and the redevelopment has been challenging. The challenge I think we face is infrastructure, and really coming to this from a regional conversation, infrastructure as it relates to funding. In our region, we've been seeing a lot more regional efforts with resources. And so I hope that I can be able to share some of the things that have been successful and are continuing to move forward with, because I think it's relevant. And what I hope to learn from y'all is your successes and ways that we can share. In addition, as my role with the economic development districts, the statewide coverage. So while I work for Marion, Polk, and Yamhill, I also work with all the other districts to get to learn and hear. So and we share and we're really gaining understanding. So I look forward to learning with you all, meeting you all, and appreciate that.
Hi, everyone. Michael Martin, League of Oregon Cities. I manage the League's water, wastewater, natural resources portfolio. Been with the League about, 5 years next month. I think I really hope to gain insight into different perspectives that are on this call. Be a good partner. I think that kind of goes hand in hand with what I hope to learn. Again, just the different perspectives and, you know, being an effective partner to sort of meet some of the goals and, you know, be productive. I think the challenge, and McCrae couldn't have teed this up better. I think the challenge is infrastructure. You'd probably hear me say ad nauseum the fact that the federal cost share of infrastructure has declined from 1977, which was about 65%, to down to 10%, even with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This is not something that the state can do alone. I think we have an obligation to try, but there are some significant challenges that I see at the federal level from an infrastructure perspective. So I think that's probably one of the bigger challenges that I see. Good morning. I'm Kevin Porter. I'm the district manager at the Polk Water Conservation District and a lifelong rural Oregonian. I live in rural unincorporated communities for born and raised here. And I farm, I grow hazelnuts and beef cattle. So a lot of experience kind of in our rural economies and facing kind of the realities and challenges of that. My hope for this is really some clarity to see, you know, what exactly we can do or should do. But I think the challenge is, you know, maybe 3 in a row here, and as living, you know, in a rural unincorporated community is, you know, Oregon's a huge state, and we have vastly different rural unincorporated communities, largely which many have decades of probably what's best described as deferred maintenance. How do we address that, or is this even, you know, a possibility to address that to begin a structure to move forward? I would love to see our rural communities thrive, and they're not. That's the reality of what we face. So I hope that we can, you know, at least start maybe a process. Might be bigger than this rack, but if we can kind of step back and kind of look at that a little bit to where we may need to go for some reality of maybe some improvement, reasonable improvement of what we can do.
All right, thank you. Any other RAC members in the room there?
I think we completed the RAC membership here in the room. We have been joined. We're joined earlier by a member of the DLCD team. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself or not. I would like her to introduce yourself, just to round things out. And so why don't you go ahead?
Everyone's looking at who is this here. I'm Layla Aman. I am the Community Services Division Manager and part of the extended group that John mentioned, Nation. So it's a privilege to be here. This is my first rulemaking, pretty new to the agency, but I'm happy to be.
Everybody be in your best behavior.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Layla. And thanks to RAC members online and in the room for going around the table there and just talking about your hopes and challenges. And I think we all know that this is a challenging topic of, you know, what it could look like to bring change or potential change to rural communities. But you know, I heard a lot, you know, rolling things up a bit in terms of hope. I heard a lot about, you know, hoping for thriving rural communities, and there may be different definitions of what that looks like, but that sounds kind of like a common goal between all of you. And you know, many of you noted the challenges around infrastructure and making sure that rural communities are ready to accept additional housing or development if that were to be the case. And I'm also hearing just a real drive for more production, but also doing that in the right way, making sure that the services and the infrastructure is already there. And that is, you know, a goal too of this rulemaking and of your charge, right? To create rules that work for Oregonians that want to see different changes in their communities. And I also appreciate what you all want to learn from each other, you know, bringing your stories, success stories, maybe not success stories into this space, hearing from each other's experiences, your lessons learned, So I hope that as we have our meetings moving forward, that you bring those stories into this space so that you can really learn from each other and create, provide input to create rules that work for the very different and vast communities in the state. So I think that's probably it for the introductions. I can move us along to the next piece unless there's anything else to add here. And Alexis, with the DLCD team, did you want to add something?
Just wanted to flag that there are a few folks that are not core members of the RAC team that are here, and maybe for just people's awareness, we could introduce ourselves quickly as well.
Sure, go for it.
Great. So I think I'll let others chime in, but I'm Alexis Hammer. I'm the legislative and policy manager at DLCD. Typically, I'm the liaison with the legislature and help advise the agency kind of what conversations went on at the legislature so that we're carrying out the legislative intent. In this case, that is not an issue because we are not carrying out, other than long ago legislation, we're carrying out kind of existing authority. So I'm still here for advising, but mainly just in the background and watching. Thanks. I'll pass it over to Casaria since I know who's on this.
And we did hear from Casaria.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So Alexis, thank you so much for speaking out. So here's what I would suggest is I'm glad we're doing this. I think it's important. I would suggest that Madeline Phillips introduce herself, followed by Kevin Young, and then Joshua Bombard. That's kind of our Adam Marl, of course. So Maddie, Kevin, Josh, and Adam, and then if Brett and Meg would like to introduce themselves, and Emily. I'm looking to see I got everybody right. So we're Madeline, Kevin, Josh, Adam, followed by Brett, Meg, and Emily. And I hope that gets everybody.
Thanks, John. John's a good batting coach. So we all have our lined up. Good morning, everyone. My name is Madeline Phillips. I work within the DLCD housing team related to urbanization, and my focus is public facilities planning. Thanks, everyone, for highlighting the challenge that infrastructure presents, and I'll pass it over to Kevin Young, next in line.
Maddie, similar to Madeline, I also work in infrastructure and urbanization. I also focus in climate and housing as well. Happy to be with you today.
Hey everybody, I'm Joshua Bombard. I'm the Southern Oregon representative for the department. I cover Douglas, Jackson, Josephine, Lake, and Klamath counties, and I'm also the lead regional rep for the department.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Marl, and I am a legislative and policy coordinator with the agency, and I focus on our housing and economic development portfolio.
Hi there, I'm Brett Estes, and I am the North Coast Regional Representative at DLCD, covering most of Lincoln County, then Tillamook County, Clatsop County, and then portions of Columbia County. And I'm part of the Coastal Division at DLCD, and along with Meg, who will be up next.
Thanks. I'm Meg Reed, the Senior Coastal Policy Specialist at DLCD, and I work coastwide. And I'll pass it to Emily. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies for being off camera, calling in today. I'm the Administrative Specialist with the Housing Accountability and Production Office. Thanks for letting me listen in today.
All right, thank you. So clearly this process is well supported by lots of DLCD staff that will be providing input and doing technical background work. So thanks all for being here and listening to the conversation too. All right.
So Sylvia, shall I share this?
Yes. Yeah, let's go back to the slides and we'll move into the Rulemaking Advisory Committee's charge and your operating guidelines. So we'll cover a bit on your process, how you all work together, and then after that, I'll hand it back over to John to go into the substance, right? The rules that you'll actually be reviewing. But first, on your charge and guidelines, if you go to the next slide. So this slide should not be a surprise to you, and I've seen John cover it in his many thrilling videos that hopefully you all have watched, the Land Use 101 and different kinds of prep videos that were sent over to you. But this charge is, what was approved by the commission in terms of what this rulemaking and your work will look on. So it's really important that our conversations in our meetings really stay focused on this charge, not stray too much from it. And if you are following along in your meeting packet, page 16 lays out this charge in a little bit more depth if you want to see more of the details. But essentially, just as a reminder, you all are charged with advising DLCD staff on rule revisions and considering these 6 things as you do so. The first is creating this voluntary process for counties to review, potentially increase housing options in unincorporated communities if they so choose. And in doing so, really making sure that any additions or expansions are supported by public facilities. You all brought that up quite a bit through infrastructure needs. And any expansions really must also maintain protections for rural and working lands and consider those natural hazard and safety issues that are really critical. And the rules really should allow for that increased density, not require to, but allow for increased density under certain conditions. So you all will be helping to consider what are those certain conditions that are appropriate here. And if counties do choose expansion or increased density, then really planning for that diverse mix of housing types to serve people of various incomes and household types. Mary Kyle, you brought that up, right? Not creating enclaves for rich, but allowing for all types of housing types. And importantly, all of this needs to reflect input from multiple interested parties and the broader public. So that's you. And as was mentioned before as well, if counties do choose to use the rules to expand their boundaries or to allow for increased housing, that process would also go through sort of the local public process. So that's your charge. And if we go into the next slide, kind of how will we do this? Here's a schedule. I know this might be a little bit hard to read if you're in the room, because it's probably on a smaller screen. If you're online, might be a little bit easier, but I'll read through it. So today's meeting, really introductory background, get to know each other, hear tip of the iceberg on what these rules are about. And then at RAC meeting number 2 in September, you will begin to discuss potential changes to the draft rules. So kind of look at some proposals for what could be changed. Then at rulemaking meeting number 3, which will be in October, we'll kind of continue to discuss and refine that language. So the DLCD staff team will be refining the language in between meetings. So that will be a time to look at that refined language and also to look at the fiscal impact statement and other statements that are a required part of rulemaking. If you've been part of RACs, you are well familiar with these. But this is a statement that's required as part of any rulemaking to really look at the economic consequences of implementing rule changes. And then there will be a Secretary of State notice and beginning of the public comment period on November 1st. So if you are listening in via the live stream, this will be your opportunity to get your voice into the process. There will be an open public comment period starting in November, going through December, which will also include an LCDC hearing December 3rd through 4th that will include opportunity for public comment. And then RAC meeting number 4, you see that's in November. That's during the public comment period, and that will be an opportunity to continue to discuss that draft language. And then once the public comment period closes, the team will be looking at all that public comment and come back to the rules with what they heard and maybe some revisions proposed based on what was heard through public comment. And that will conclude the rulemaking advisory committee process, and it's expected that LCDC would adopt the rules in February of 2027. I do have a couple more slides to go to, but I'm just going to pause here to see if there are any kind of questions about this process or also clarification from DLCD on anything here. And Marcus, I see your hand up.
Thank you. So I guess this process you have here, is this your regular, you do this like every other year, or how often does this happen?
I'll hand that over to John or someone in the room there.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Marcus, for the question. So we have a couple different approaches for rulemaking. We do typically have a kind of a housekeeping rulemaking after the Legislative Assembly's long session, to make sure we make conforming rulemakings. In addition to that, our commission, LCDC, comes up with a kind of a work program for every biennium, in which they identify the items that they anticipate and expect to work on over that next 2-year period. That more recently, that work program has been heavily populated by work assigned by the legislature, by the governor's office, and this particular rulemaking kind of falls into that category. So we don't have a regular series of this year we're going to work on this rulemaking, and then we'll come back and look at it again next year. However, one of the things that we've been doing more frequently, and we may see fit for doing it here too, is building in a look back period, right? So building in we did the sage grounds, we've done this with solar, but to say, we're going to obligate ourselves as a department to take a look at these rules again in 5 or 10 years, kind of canvass the group that we worked with the first time and see how they're feeling, and then if necessary, make recommendations to the commission. So that I think there's a possibility to do that. So again, to answer your question real quickly, we have a couple different flavors. One is the very straightforward and simple housekeeping type stuff. Others is more policy stuff that many times is driven by what the legislature, the governor sees fit to assign to us. And we could, if we choose to, establish a period where we come back and review these rules to make sure they're doing what we want them to do at some point in the future. Hopefully that helps. I know it's a little bit long-winded explanation. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much. And the reason why I ask is just, we all know what this administration's headed to. So it's kind of sparked that interest on how often these get looked at in order to promote, empower, and support all these programs that you're wanting to do. So that's the reason why I asked. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. Anyone else?
If I may, Sylvia, again,
yes.
I just got done talking, but just real quickly, I know some folks are probably like, this is pretty compressed. There's a lot of meetings in pretty quick order, and some of them we've had to try to schedule, are trying to schedule in times that we know are going to be difficult for people. We apologize in advance for that. We have chosen, we made a deliberate choice, rather than just declare when the meetings are going to be. We try to see what time works best for everyone. That feels more collaborative to us. Now, what's really driving this is the LCDC adoption. We're respected. The folks, the governor's office and the commission leadership has said this really needs to be across the finish line incredible. So everything kind of keys off of that, right? In order to do that, we need to be able to have a hearing in December. In order to be able to have that hearing in December, we have to have Secretary of State notice at the end of October. So anyway, there's the process is sort of embedded with certain milestones. We just have to meet in order to get across the finish line when we're expected to do so. So I'll stop there. Hopefully that if anybody's wondering why the first full week in September, that's leg day. We know we're sorry for that, but it just we kind of have to hit those markers to be able to accomplish this work in the duration of time that we're expected to accomplish.
Thanks, John. All right, let's move into the next slide. And these next 4 or 5 slides here, this is part of your operating guidelines for the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. So this is laid out in the operating guidelines document that's on page 11 of your packet if you are following along there. So it really just kind of lays out the rules, expectations, and protocols for your meetings. So just a reminder about your role as RAC members, you're advisory to the department, you're really providing guidance to inform draft rule language. We're not expecting you all to come to consensus on one recommendation, but it's really providing input to the team. And that being said, if there's different points of view that are coming out on the table that are very different, we're going to try to get into the nuance of that and see if there's something closer that could meet those multiple perspectives, and create rules that work better for multiple perspectives. And of course, DLCD staff along the way, they're going to be providing information, listening to your guidance as they update those rules and bring this all through the public process. And then my job as your facilitator is to support your dialogue, kind of keep track of key themes, points of discussion, ask some of those follow-up questions to really get at the nuance, and to apply your operating guidelines and make sure that these meetings feel fair and that everyone's having an opportunity to be heard. Next slide. So in terms of meetings being fair and feeling like you have an opportunity to be heard, we do have some expectations of RAC members, and that is that you act in good faith, which means that you're coming to the table, keeping in mind your charge, and trying to find solutions that work for others, and really keeping that charge in mind. We expect you to review meeting materials in advance, so that will include any draft rules or proposals and the fiscal impact statements, other statements that will be coming your way. We also expect that if you miss a meeting, you review the recording or read the meeting summary or both, so that you can stay up to speed and we don't have to kind of go backwards too much at upcoming meetings. And we also expect that you will be a liaison. The RAC is selected. We have 19 members on this RAC, but we know that there are tables behind this table. So we expect that you're going to your decision makers or others within your organizations to bring their input into the process and to keep them informed as well. Next slide. To have productive meetings, we do have a few guidelines that we expect you all to pay attention to as well. These are all just, be good humans guidelines, but just reminders. We expect that you'll really listen to each other, seek to understand, allow for a balance of speaking time, and that's my job too, but also yours to, step up and bring your comments in if you haven't been saying much, and step back if your voice has been out there a lot. We expect you to respect the agenda. We are going to try to go through multiple topics at each of these meetings. So really try to stay on time, try to go through the agenda topics. And we ask that you be tough on the issues, but not on the people, right? So stay respectful, but bring your voice in and like probe and ask tough questions, bring in your comments, be honest, really be tough on the issues. Please also do raise your concerns in the meetings as much as possible, rather than using outside forums to do so. And do try to seek common ground. So, right, so through your good listening and seeking to understand, try to figure out if we can find places where people can agree. And we also expect that you'll stay engaged, avoid multitasking. I know online especially, it's easy to have 5 windows open, maybe 20, but please just try to really focus on the meetings during the 3 hours that we have together each month. Next slide. This is laid out a bit in your operating protocols as well, but you do have an opportunity to name an alternate if you feel like you need one for your organization or your interest type. If you do so, please just name that as soon as possible. Let the DLCD staff team know. And if you do have an alternate, just reminder, it's your responsibility to stay up to speed, both of you. And if you and your alternate are both attending a meeting, just choose one to speak on behalf of your organization. And next slide, just a bit on public meetings and communications. Just a reminder that these RAC meetings are part of the public record. That includes what's said in the meeting and written correspondence outside of the meeting. And members, if you have something that you want to share with the full committee, we ask that you send that to the DLCD team first and then ask that it be shared on your behalf. This kind of avoids serial meetings being open up and kind of not triggering that public meeting requirement. But we will share any communications with the full group if you request it. And if you get any media inquiries about the process, please just let DLCD know. And if you do speak in other forums about this process, just a reminder to identify views as your own, not that of the committee as a whole or of staff. Those are the key guidelines. There's a few more details in the document if you want to go through it, but those are the main pieces. So I'll just see if there's any questions about those operating guidelines, any major concerns.
Not seeing any hands here in the room.
Thank you, John, for checking that. Okay, and I won't ask for a, confirmation from everyone that you agree to and can accept to abide by these rules, but I'll just, any concerns, just lay them out here, please. I'll give it a second. Or, anything else that you would want to add and make sure that happens so that we can have productive meetings. Okay. Well, we are ahead of schedule. We could take a break now or maybe just start to get through some of the intro information. Maybe John, I'll ask you since you have the next piece.
So I'm inclined to think maybe we take a quick break and then move in to the next piece. Which probably won't be the most fun piece. So maybe we may take a quick break and then buckle up and buckle in for talking about some existing rules, which is I find it interesting, but not everybody appreciates them as much as I do. That's my thought. But I'm absolutely content to do whatever. So the preference of the crew.
Yes, I think that's great. Let's take a break, grab some coffee, settle in, and we'll get back at 10:10, ready to sort of absorb some information about these rules. So feel free to go off camera if you're online and get on mute, and we'll see you at 10:10.
Sure.
Mail 4 days a week.
All right.
Fix this, right?
Okay, welcome back, everyone.
Especially.
Hopefully everyone is back in the room as well. I see some folks
I think
joined
we
again.
are, except for Angela, who I'm sure will be with us directly. So
okay,
I would say let's go ahead and move forward. Hope everybody had a good break. We're telling the folks who are in the room, if you need to go out that door again, my key is right there. Go and just grab it as you go out so you don't get locked out. I need to say there are other I'm afraid we're gonna be the only one that can get back in. Yeah, thank you, Shelley. Should I go ahead and put the PowerPoint back up and kind of
Yes, yeah, put the slides back up, and I'll say, yeah, John's going to go over a little bit about what's in the existing rules. And just a reminder, you know, that's a lot of information. It's going to feel like drinking out of a fire hose for a little bit. But we do kind of want to provide that tip of the iceberg information today. And you know, we expect your questions and want to get all of your questions. But if we start getting into really deep specific issues, we might table those, put them in the parking lot for discussion at a future meeting, because might not all have all the answers today, and maybe it's a more robust discussion for later. But just definitely want to get that broad overview look of the rules today. And John, I'm assuming we'll just stop for questions at appropriate times within the presentation, and I will hand it back over to you.
Great, thank you so much. I have to confess, I really enjoyed listening to everybody. Earlier, I could it would have been fun to go on. It seemed like everybody that introduced themselves, I had questions I could ask. I still do want to talk about hazelnuts and beef cattle a little later on. For real, that's very interesting. So I'm going to go and try to do a quick overview of our rules. I kind of started with this slide. This is actually not from our administrative rules. This is from statewide planning goal 14, which is our urbanization goal, and does identify unincorporated communities as part of the text. And I emphasize this kind of last sentence because I think that helps sort of underpin, you know, what we're trying to do through this effort overall, through our consideration of unincorporated communities overall, as well as provide some information for this project too, right? We want to, you know, we don't want to adverse impact farm and forest operations. We don't want to interfere with efficient functioning of urban growth boundaries. So that's stated in our statewide planning rules. A little bit of a background real quick. The existing administrative rules, and there are and have been for some time, for unincorporated communities, you know, started back in the early 90s. And there was a survey that resulted in a list. And that list, I think, is in, I'm sure it is attached to the staff report materials, and is attached also to the administrative rule, which informed those communities that were candidates. The actual rules adopted in 94. We redid the survey in 97 because we realized something was missing, and I came back in the later 90s, in mid 2000-ish, 20 years ago now. God, it seems like it was yesterday, where there were some revisions with regards to employment uses, basically elevating the threshold for employment uses. Back then, those may remember, you know, the economic development was the subject on everybody's mind. And then we did touch up the rules with regard to temporary sheltering, which we got into as a result of the 2020 wildfires, right? The Labor Day fires, which decimated communities like Blue River. So that's kind of a little bit of back. This is Terrebonne, by the way, on the right hand side. You kind of see the road system. This is a rural community in Deschutes County, north of Redmond. Either road patterning and the kind of variety of uses. But anyway, I thought that was a decent example of a thing. There's a couple different categories we're likely to get into. I just sort of generally divided into form and substance. And Sylvia touched on this a little bit earlier. You know, form is updating out-of-date citations. You know, that's probably more meaningful than it sounds. So these rules were written 30 years ago. So some of the sites are just old, right? And some of them aren't relevant. So we might have a conversation about what is, right? And then the arrangement and location of rule provisions. Again, I think that could be more important than it kind of sounds like. Untangling some of these rules to result in a clear, understandable pathway, I think could provide a lot of value, particularly as it relates to urban unincorporated communities. And then, some substance, right? Reviewing the original policy choices. Do they remain durable? The policy choices made 30 years ago continue to be relevant today. I think a lot of them are. Maybe not, maybe some others. And then different opportunities or new opportunities, refined opportunities for the expansion of community boundaries. And how do we see fit to apply things along those lines? And then the second category, which is similar, some of this will be within the existing boundaries, right? Existing knowledge boundaries of unincorporated communities, and then some of them will be talking about expanded boundaries. And I like to get Bigfoot and Sasquatch into every PowerPoint that I do, so this is the way I manage to keep more Sasquatch into this. And here we're kind of getting into now, kind of leaning into the rules. I just laid out the 4 types of unincorporated communities. I believe this stuff starts on around page 37 of the meeting materials and the rules. This is really just drawn from the definition portion, but there are 4 distinct types. There's the resort communities. That's Welch's. That's Wallowa Lake, right? There's the rural communities, which tend to appear more like little towns or cities. They have a variety of land use. That's boring. We'll see some of these on tour this afternoon. Rural service centers are more characterized by less by residential stuff, but more by services and employment. The Big Junction. I'm sure we've all both passed through Big Junction. And then the urban unincorporated communities are the larger ones. These really do appear much more like cities or towns, and that's Pacific City or White City. That's what Lapine was until it incorporated, or Damascus was until it incorporated. Actually, I may not be quite right on Damascus, but I think that's what it was. I wanted to just display this particular rule and all the provisions in it. And this is division 22. This is the existing unincorporated community rule. And so it's got purpose and definitions. I don't think we're going to deal too much with designation of community areas. That's not quite what the approach is, but I didn't want to leave it out, right? But I think most of the work, my sense is will be in planning and zoning in 0030. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then also, as we mentioned before, kind of the expansion of unincorporated community, which is found in a couple different places, depending upon what type it is. And one of those places, if your urban unincorporated community is in this portion of the rule. There's some other really important things. I think all of it's really important, and I really found myself appreciating the kind of the wisdom of the original drafters. Public facility plans under certain circumstances. Coordination and citizen involvement is really emphasized, and I think should continue to be. Applicability. Most of this work was anticipated to be done through peer review, and that has been kind of been drawn back in a number of ways in the legislature and others. But so we may want to touch on that a little bit at some point. Okay, here's where I know this is really dense. I apologize to you guys for this stuff. I worked really hard to figure out a way to get this on a slide, and this is what I came up with. And I kind of paraphrased and tried to highlight what I think are probably the most relevant to these conversations. So I'm just going to walk through them. This is what the planning and zoning portion speaks to. These are the kinds of things in 0030. That segment of division 22. Basically, number one is pretty straightforward. You'll notice that rural service centers are not mentioned there, so they don't need individual plan and zone designations. That'd be one, just one size fits all, which is a terrible term, but one individual plan and zone designation rather than individual. So moving forward, I think it's really important to recognize that the existing rules do and have for a long time authorize any residential use and density in unincorporated communities, right? So it's, we're not starting from scratch. It's not, if folks were concerned that we're going to create new opportunities to blow up the density. No, we're not. There's that potential is existing. Understanding it better might be useful, and it's subject to the requirements of this division, and which we'll get to. Most of those are on the right hand side. This area of the rule does also talks about planning and zoning for industrial uses, employment type uses, and commercial uses 3 and 4, right? And in many ways, it emphasizes small scale, low impact, or serving traveling public, or things like that. I don't really know that we're going to get into that too much. We did identify it to some extent in the staff report, but the only reason I can see that we possibly would get into these conversations is if it's necessary to help support housing production, housing produced in those areas, right? Make sure that folks living in these communities also had adequate availability of services and employment opportunities. So I'm just going to set that aside. I don't want to ignore it, but I'm just going to kind of set that aside for now. If that's okay, we can come back to it. 5, same deal, hotels and motels. You'd be surprised how spicy that got back in the day. But there's some provisions, and again, I was on it. You're going to repeat this a lot. I'm just kind of scratching the surface. There's a lot more language in the rules, so we can, if anybody want to take a deeper dive, we can. I think this is starting on page about 39 of the meeting materials. The number 6, 7, and 8. This is really kind of the important stuff. That sort of quantifies. These are the requirements of the division, right? That planning and zoning do not adversely affect agricultural forestry uses. That it is consistent with the functioning capacity of transportation facilities, right? That's transportation planning and local transportation system plans. Human development will not result in public health hazards or human carrying capacity of stuff. That's the infrastructure connection in many ways that I think we all get being so important, and then also be consistent with acknowledged regional goals, objectives, metro types of things, which is more relevant in some areas than others. But again, there's a consistent emphasis on coordination and consistency, and I thought it would be a good idea to bring it to. It goes on to talk a little bit more about this or that, used mostly about sheltering for wildfire and other events. But that's kind of the essence of what the planning and zoning direction and requirements look like. So with that, I'm hopping out of Division 22 and into Division 4. And now we're talking about expansion
and John, sorry, maybe before you move into expansion, just pausing for a second. Any initial questions, clarifications? We don't have to get into full discussion on where you see potential changes in these rules, but any clarifying questions that would be helpful to you understand the kind of planning and zoning piece here.
So for 6 and 9, just to kind of level set, 6 is that interpreted similarly is the farm impacts test.
I don't think so. Right? I think it's different. It's different language. Now, the farm impact test, that's a longstanding conditional use criteria. It lives at 215, 296. It's also in one way or another in our farm and forest rules. It's not the same. It's not the same thing. I don't believe it's the same touch. Right? I would say it's a lighter touch.
For 9, is there going to be any consideration around incorporating state goals into this as well? Just with the legislation recently passing and setting statewide production targets, seems like that might be a small change.
So that's a great question. So I understand it, Brock. What I think is would we be considering changes to the statewide planning goals in addition to the ministry rules to implement those goals, or my
so I think about 88% of our 20-year housing production is planned for within city boundaries. About 12% is outside those UGBs. And so saying the county regulations for unincorporated communities also being combined with state goals aside from the 19 land use goals.
Yeah, I think I need to get my head around that a little bit. In all honesty, I think it's a fair question. Let's keep it on the table. I don't. Maybe we can talk a little more about it as we get into the question. But yeah, I think that's. I wish I had a better. I wish I had a back talk response to that, and I just don't. But thank you for asking it.
Great. Yeah. And I think that it was Brock, we mostly heard you. I think that was Brock around would we consider talking about state goals here as well? So we'll kind of put that on the list for later discussion. And we can mostly hear you, but not perfectly. So just if there's folks speaking in the room, maybe move the microphone around.
Where's the microphone?
Oh, are they in the ceiling? Okay.
I'll talk up.
Okay.
Stand up.
Yeah,
And I think Marcus, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is interesting. You know, it's reminding me, you know, I'm HUD funded. We have about 200 units that are under HUD regulation. I'm looking at this almost like environmental review type similarities. And so I'm kind of wondering, do you coordinate or do you work with folks like that as a template, kind of, because they kind of mirror each other? How close are you to an airport? How close you are to water? How close are you to you know, smoky areas or fire areas? So I'm kind of reading this, kind of wondering, where does the nuts and bolts begin with the actual code of planning required in this area, this materials only, this what you can't use, etc. So I might be getting ahead of you guys, but I'm just kind of reading this and it's sparking an interest for environmental reviews. All just a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you for the question. I would say that that we do attempt to be aware of and coordinate with mostly we do that at the state level, which so we'd be a little bit more involved with the Housing Community Services Department, who obviously works with the federal agency. So maybe it's sort of a you know, kind of a through them. And you know, we intend to, you know, work with them further and make sure that, you know, we are all online on the same page moving forward. And you know, what this does really is provide the guidance and some sideboards, but guidance too about how counties stand up their own programs. And so what this would do is be the rules that are relied on by a local jurisdiction county to come up with planning and zoning arrangements that they adopt into their own comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance that implements the, you know, policies and overall objectives of the, you know, the state's unincorporated community policy. So again, that's kind of a long-winded answer. I feel like I touched and danced around the edges a little bit, but hopefully that's helpful, Marcus.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I think keep going then, John.
And please, you guys, so please do feel free to stop me anytime. I can't see any hands, so I'm just going to kind of roll until I get the yellow light. So I'm going to back up just a second about this with regard to this slide. Again, we've kind of transitioned about talking planning and zoning inside of existing and designated unincorporated communities to what it looks like to expand. You know, what are the opportunities to expand an unincorporated community? And what I didn't do here is talk about what an exception is, or the exceptions process, which is in many ways carried out, implemented, interpreted by our division. And an exception is a land use process that basically allows a county to consider different possibilities. You know, if there's something that is not provided for under an applicable goal 3 is our agricultural land, a very common goal to look at as a possible exception candidate. If there's a use that really makes good sense, but isn't otherwise provided for, the exception route is available for a county to be able to identify and justify why it's a change. It's going strictly adhering to goals would otherwise apply aren't necessary. So that's kind of the backdrop here. And what we have is again, I've just kind of pulled out this particular piece of this exceptions rule, which talks about the reasons that can be used to justify an exception. This particular area speaks to unincorporated communities, and so I try to use sienna. I think it's the color, it's becoming one of my favorite colors for some reason, to kind of illustrate the important pieces here. And in this instance, we see, 5 speaks to unincorporated communities, and there's an emphasis on accommodating a specific rural use, right? So in order to expand an unincorporated community, it needs to be to accommodate a specific rural use. And there's a lot more to that. It talks about what it means if it's residential expansion, what it means if it's industrial expansion. But that's the kind of leads from there. That a specific rural use. So I think of it as like a situational opportunity. And we can see the emphasis on coordination and services. And in 6, it basically says you got to do all that. You're an urban unincorporated community. You got to do all that in 5. Plus, you got to do the stuff back in Division 22. And we'll get back to that in a second. But the point here, I guess I would say, is that as things stand right now, urban unincorporated communities have 2 sets of criteria. The first piece is here, and which we'll finish out and tie off here in a second. But the second piece is back in the other division, and they don't seem entirely connected. I'll just say it. I'll be honest. I think this is an area where we could really help everybody out by sort of untangling stuff and making sure we've got the right straightforward opportunity. So that's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted. So apologize for that, you guys. Oh, and here's our first rule revision right here. I think because somehow we managed to get the 4 pertaining to 65 now. So again, moving forward or backward, I don't know why we wrote this rule, but you kind of go to 22, then you go back. Just bear with me. If you can satisfy the tests that we just looked at, then you can move to this area of the rule, right? So the reasons to justify, that's what we just looked at. Then there are other pieces, kind of an alternatives analysis, look at the environmental, economic, social, and energy consequences of one thing or another, compatible with the other uses. So again, there's a lot more text about what that means, and we can take the deeper dive, but I didn't want to do that until unless folks wanted to do that. The point is, again, there's more stuff, right? And then there's even more stuff. And it says that again, operating within that 0020 area, the expansion of unincorporated community. This is all 4 and in here. But there's a prioritization. Obviously, folks familiar with the UGB process and others will recognize some of this stuff. And basically, the highest land for prioritized for expansion is exception areas and non-resource land adjacent to the boundaries. The lower priorities are better farm and forest lands, and so you really should shoot for those higher priorities. But you can like just as with an urban growth boundary expansion, you can include those lower priority lands. That is, those lands that have a higher value for farm and forest uses, but you got to justify it. You have to be able to show you can't meet your need, or you need to take some to get the service that needs to get to. And so anyway, this point there is that there is a prioritization of being brought. And these things we just talked about apply to all unincorporated communities.
Can I ask a clarification?
Yes, you may.
So is Division 4 the establishment of unincorporated areas? What is
It is not.
Okay.
Thank you for that question. So the establishment of unincorporated communities is in that Division 22.
Okay.
That was supposed to be. I glossed over really quick. I didn't talk very much about it. Eric Walker, I can tell you, I can tell you all about it. but that resides in the unincorporated communities rule. That's what's kind of different, right? I mean, kind of hop back and forth, and maybe all this should live in one place. Maybe they should all live in Division 22. I think that would be a reasonable question to ask. But what this is specific to is expanding the boundaries, expanding them, and possibly expanding into farm forest lands and how you get there from there, right? So it's a situational deal. It's a response to a particular rural use, and then you can pass that test. Then you go to this. So then, this is the additive items for urban unincorporated communities, for the bigger cities, for the bigger types of communities, 150 residences, and variety of service and languages and services. You know what? I'm going to back up just a second. If that's okay. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? Any more questions about here? So I'm going to go back even further. So here's when I look at the image in one of the earlier slides, that's a picture of Blyore in Klamath Falls. And so one thing, and it got me thinking about just a possible example. It's just a, theoretically a example of accommodating a specific rural use for residential purposes. I don't know how many are familiar with the Forest Mountain, which is a site in western Klamath County. It's been known, if you're a prospector, if you're in the gold prospecting community, you've heard of Forest Mountain, right? So it's been known for gold deposits for a long, long time, and no one's really acted on that. The only gold's trading at $4,000 now. So whatever it is now, that opens up possibilities that maybe we're available for. And there's been some interest in maybe pursuing mining. If that happened, and probably won't, but let's just say Quartz Mountain was aggressively mined and created 200 jobs out there. And it may not be unreasonable to say, well, how are we going to house these people? Bly and Beatty aren't that far from Quartz Mountain. And so that could be a specific rural use that a gold mine, generates a need for housing, could be a basis to expand the unincorporated communities if they need to expand. But it would only be for that use. It's not an inventory of land, not a long range type of opportunity. It's specific there, it's situational. Okay, so sorry for that departure there. No, I'm sorry. Do we get Matt back in? He's probably.
Yes, Matt is here in the room. Great.
He's probably checking on wildfire. And I'm glad to see you here. I thought you'd probably be in a dozer. So I'm glad, Matt, I'm glad you're with us today.
No, I just had to rejoin. My phone dropped you.
Okay, well, I'm glad you did. So again, kind of setting all that stuff aside, which applies to all expansions for any unincorporated community. Division 22, now we're back in 22, has some parameters for urban unincorporated communities. So, and we start out with just number one talks about all the planning goals applicable to cities also apply to urban unincorporated. Okay, that might be interesting to be back with us today. But beyond that, there is the opportunity to expand these communities, but it's limited to areas that that meet these characteristics, right? I've generally called them the distance prohibition. So if you're an urban unincorporated community that is not 20 road miles from a UGB over 25,000, the answer is no. You don't get to expand. Or if you're an urban unincorporated community that isn't 10 miles from an urban growth boundary population of 25,000 or less, again, your answer is no. You're forbidden from considering expansion. And there are urban unincorporated communities in this state that are limited. we're gonna look at Brooks, next meeting. That falls within this distance. The Hood River, some of the Hood River considerations would be inhibited based on that. Some of the code, the same deal. So anyway, I think this is a self-executing provision that carries out, I believe, intended to carry out the language in bulwarking, which talks about basically, again, the efficient operating of urban growth boundaries. We want to undermine those. So this is a blunt way to do that. But I think it's wise to say we should be thoughtful about how we do this, because we don't want to unnecessarily undermine the integrity of these UGBs. Maybe this could be reconsidered. Maybe we could think about this in a different way, or maybe there's another alternative. I don't know. Maybe the answer is that's a bad idea, but again, I think that is something that could be on the table at some point if the RAC sees fit to get into it. Here again, this talks about long-term need, right? Expanding the boundaries of the UUC shall demonstrate a long-term need for housing and be based on a population forecast, so on and so forth. So again, this is a long-term need, but we also have to address the situational thing to accommodate sort of rural use. So I'm not quite sure how to harmonize these things, and I'm worried that it results in a little bit of a I would say at least confusing. I don't know that it's inherently inconsistent, but it's confusing, and we might want to make a decision. It feels very much to me like Division 22 contemplates the ability for an urban unincorporated community to behave or be treated more like an urban growth boundary, right? So you can have a long-term need. That's an inventory. That's an inventory of developable land that's needed to meet this need. Again, we talk about services and also with infill potential. So again, it's not, it's our carte blanche. You get to think about things, but under the right circumstances. Here again, we have a prioritization schedule looking very much like we just looked at. So you have to do it twice. Probably not. You probably can do it once, but nonetheless, it does exist in two different situations. You probably would need to at least make findings against both of them. And underlined this language, the criteria for amendment of an urban growth boundary. Again, I feel that's a clear indication that the commission expected unincorporated communities to be treated more like urban growth boundaries, urban unincorporated communities. But I think the criteria is different then. So that probably still stands to make sense, but we might want to look and see if it continued to do the things that we thought it was going to do. And then I'm just going to kind of cruise through the rest of them. I think they make a lot of sense. Again, emphasis on sewer and water, only expand to the response of what the needs are unified. These citations, at least ORS 197.314, is antiquated. There is no longer the citation. It's about manufactured homes. Live somewhere else now. Goal 10 is a urban goal, and so I don't know. That could stand some attention to look at, figure out, and maybe iron out. And here again, we have our ag and forestry stuff, and developable land is. I don't think we have that term anymore, and if we do, it's certainly not here at this site. So should we just drop that, or is there a better term to kind of quantify what should be looking at? And then 9 here, right? Long-term need in this context means 10 years, which is different than, as we know, than from urban growth boundaries. And I just highlighted that because maybe those seem like things that kind of emerge as reasonable things to take a look at. Maybe they're not. Hopefully, we're not fixated on this. And I should have started by this too, you guys. This isn't the department's recommendations. This isn't the department's position. We're not saying this is what we're going to do. We're just trying to offer our understanding and our thoughts about what might be worth talking about more and what might not be. But, at the end of the day, it's really going to be, in many ways determined by, how the RAC feels about stuff. I just threw this in here for fun. This is about our Division 11, which is our public facilities planning. That talks about public facility plans and stuff, so on and so forth. And we mentioned Goal 11 in our staff report to the commission. To put it here, we could talk about this more if we need to. I don't know if we will or not. But if we do get back to it, this is where most of that public facilities and services policy, and it's a lot about sewer and water, really sewer and water and serving lands outside of those low boundaries. If we need to get that now, unincorporated communities can have any level of sewer and water services. That's one of the benefits the commission wanted to identify when they adopted the rule to start out with. So it's not a matter of can they not have, yes, they can. So I'm gonna stop. Thankfully, right? You guys are probably happy to have me stop, but I'm gonna turn it back to the facilitator for a second, and then we can kind of start into some of these questions. And I think I'm really interested to hear what both might think.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, John. And thanks for that background. Yeah, there's a lot in the rules, and as John said, this is kind of laying out what's currently in the rules and up to the rack on what you want to focus on for potential changes. And we have some discussion questions up here that we can go into more depth on, but maybe first just want to see if there's, again, any clarifying questions or things that would be helpful for you to better understand the rules that you heard just now. Yeah, Gail, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I have two questions. So the first question is how does the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis play into this? Because even though the analysis is really focused on areas with UGBs, there's a built-in assumption that housing development will occur outside UGBs, and that's kind of factored into the total housing unit counts that are part of the ONA. And then the second question is, if you had a rural community that over time has reached a threshold that it could qualify for an urban unincorporated community, would those same distance requirements, even if you don't expand the boundaries, would those distance requirements from a UGB still apply? Just curious.
So thank you, Gail. I tell you what, I'm going to take a crack at your second question, but I'm going to invite Palmer to maybe take a crack at your first one. So I think if I'm understanding the question is, if you had a community that was originally designated as, let's say, rural community, right, as you said, but it's grown now. It didn't have 150 residents before, but now it does. So now it meets the characteristics of an urban unincorporated community. I believe that it could be designated. I think the county could reconsider what the appropriate designation is. I don't believe that the distance limitations would have any impact on that determination. I do believe they would continue to apply in the instance of expanding that urban unincorporated. So I don't know if I hit all the points there or not, but that's kind of my sense. Did I get it? Did I get your question, Gail?
You did. Thank you, John.
So if Palmer, I don't know enough about the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, but if Palmer, or anybody else on our team that does.
Yeah, John, I can start. Thank you. And thank you for your question, Gail. And there are others on the call here who can add more context or, if I misstate something, correct. So the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, excuse me, and I'm sure you probably know this, Gail, but for the benefit of everyone, it does allocate through a statewide methodology the housing need, as you said, and it does do so in a way that includes housing outside of UGBs. The actual production targets, though, are for individual cities, and Well, actually, I should misstate. I think I misstated that. I think the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis as a methodology statewide does determine housing production outside of the UGBs. The actual allocations, I should be very clear here, are allocations to urban growth areas, urban growth boundaries. So what I'm not really clear on is how, using the ONA methodology, you would look to assign or determine, maybe a better word, what kind of housing need might be happening for unincorporated communities. I don't think it goes to that granular of a level, is my understanding of how the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. So one of the questions for this RAC will be, to what extent does the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis as a statewide methodology have any input on looking at defining housing need for unincorporated communities? But I'll see if, Maddie or Kevin or anybody, not to put them on the spot, want to chime in and offer any perspective.
Thanks. Maddie Phillips, again, Public Facilities Planner within the Housing Division. Gail, thanks for your question. I think what we will absolutely, as Palmer noted, need to come back to this and explore it further, because I think it is a relevant comparison of how an urban or unincorporated community assesses their needs. Experience tells me that the Population Research Center's forecasts do look at unincorporated places. And I know in work that is ongoing right now with Hood River County and Eric's team, we are considering what the forecast for that area includes, and the Population Research Center forecast is a component of the Oregon Housing Needs Assessment allocation process. So there is embedded in the methodology some component around unincorporated places. However, there are not allocations identified for unincorporated places. So we'd have to work through what components of the methodology apply or could apply to an unincorporated place, and then work through that process. And I welcome others in their experience. I know there are a number of folks on the call who have had experience working and developing the ONA methodology.
Yeah, thanks, Madeline. And Mary Kyle, did you have something on this?
I did. It was just a follow-up comment to Maddie's information that this isn't new to the DLCD staff who've been immersed in ONA, but the DAS allocations to urban growth boundaries are also separated into 5 income categories. So if we were to be looking at any of that type of information for areas outside urban growth boundaries for unincorporated communities, I think that would be an essential part of the component to understand, again, who needs the housing, what type of housing, at what income levels. So it's not just a population projection for outside UGBs. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mary Kyle. And Kevin?
Just a little bit of a follow-on, and I don't know the answer to this question, but something that we should explore is whether the DAS methodology, I mean, one of the key differences that I can think of is that cities are, the way Oregon planning is designed, cities grow, and we're expecting populations to change over time. There may be more of a static assumption for unincorporated communities. I can't speak to the methodology, but that is something that we could look into. That maybe the assumption is that unincorporated communities or rural housing population, housing growth is not planned for growth at the same level. So again, something we can look into.
That's helpful. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, so maybe that's just something to bring back to this group, is considerations for how the ONA data and methodology is used in this process.
So I couldn't resist moving back to this, but I don't know that it's apples and apples, but it reminded me, right, of the conversation about having a basis. What is that long-term need? And the way it's written now, it's a population growth estimate. That was different. I think that that meant different things back then than it does necessarily today. And that was, some of us will remember, you know, when it was a number that was awarded to the county, it was an overall population number, and then the county, split that up and said, you know, this city will get this much, and this city will get that much, right? So they distribute that. We don't really do it that way today, and so I mean, reconciling the right way to understand the right share and in the context of housing needs and income. Anyway, I think that's something that would be worthwhile digging into further, you know, either in that context or another one. So thank you for that for indulging me on that point.
John,
yeah,
just to your point, part of the ONA methodology as well takes in change in demographics. So even if the population were not to increase over the next 20 years, you might see demographic shifts that change the need for housing. For example, if you're a two-parent household, you got 2 kids, 20 years from now, those kids might grow up and move out of the house, even if they don't have kids or spouses that move with them, right? That is 2 more payments that need to be accommodated for them to be able to move out of the parents' house in that kind of situation. So I know the numbers are a bit more detailed on how that all breaks out, but the population alone might not be a sufficient threshold to look at for reasons like that.
I think it's a great point. I sure thank you for sharing it, Brock. Brock. Sorry, Brock Nation. No. For the Hawk Nation, they're illegitimate covenant.
All right, thanks for that. So any other kind of clarifying questions? Yeah, Brandon?
Well, maybe not clarifying questions. When you're ready for questions for the RAC answers, let me know.
Yeah, but maybe I'll pose these questions and then we can get back to that, Brandon. So we, as John was describing, there's sort of, this is a like grossly estimation, but there's kind of these 2 big buckets of what the RAC will be looking at. One is, what are how can unincorporated communities potentially plan for increasing housing within their boundaries? And then what are the opportunities to potentially expand those boundaries? So kind of 2 categories. There's more than that, but just to sort of lump everything up. So we want to start to get your input on kind of what characteristics might make an unincorporated community more suitable for looking at potentially increasing voluntarily housing within their boundaries. And then also what conditions might need to be in place for an unincorporated community to expand those boundaries. So we're going to get into those 2 and want to hear your thoughts on them. But I'll hand it over to John for just a little bit more background before we dive into each of these. So John, if you want to go to the next slide, and then we'll dive into that first question, kind of focusing on within existing boundaries.
Yeah, so thank you, Tilly. The next 3 slides, we just sort of, we called out the 3 questions, and then we dedicated 1 slide each question with hopefully some food for thought, right? And so this is this Venn diagram, which by the way are almost impossible to create. You have a level of technical capacity of mind. So I'm very proud of this. I'm very proud of this Venn diagram. But we wanted to just kind of say there's a lot of stuff that goes into, being suitable for housing, right? A lot of things that goes into whether that's going to happen or not happen or can happen. And some of the stuff we can get at, but a lot of it we really can't, right? It's probably some of the most important stuff. So let's say not on this table. Don't want to be dismissive of any of these things because they're very important. But we're probably not going to be able to, reduce builder costs or increase builder availability or, affect market demand or interest rates, all the stuff, access to capital, so on and so forth. That's just unfortunately probably beyond our ability, even if we wanted to. The stuff that when I say at the table, we've seen a strong emphasis on infrastructure and carrying capacity and community support. So I wanted to just kind of tag some of the stuff that, remember, we're not operating without a net. There's stuff that already speak to these issues. Not that we couldn't do more or think about it otherwise, but they are at the table currently. But on the table, right, is stuff that we could probably get at a little maybe more constructively to this rulemaking. Maybe there's be some things that can be more additive. In the planning and zoning piece of Division 22 could be a place to start. We've seen this pretty thorough right now, but maybe there's other things to think about in different ways. So anyway, I just, at this point, it's all additive at this point. We're putting it on the table, right? There may come a time when with this, we're selective and taking things off the table. Right now, there's no bad ideas, and really to hear what folks might have to say.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, John. So I'll turn it to the committee to see if you have any thoughts on this first question of, when you think about inside the boundaries of an existing unincorporated community, what kind of needs to be in place to make it more suitable for housing, or what would you potentially want to see added into the rules to kind of get at the goals that you all were talking about making rural areas thriving places, but that also keep in mind the real constraints of what it means to bring in more housing. And I'll go first to Brandon.
All right, thank you. So from Marion County's experience, a lot of the unincorporated communities we have really build on the farming community. We have a lot of farming, people work in the farming industry a lot, and they want to live near the farm that's happening. So our farms are spread all around the county, and we have unincorporated communities all around the county, and people heavily work there in the farming industry. And the homes in those areas are more affordable. The biggest challenge is just them having some more control over their own infrastructure and be able to set up the kind of systems that they need to support themselves. But that desire to live in the rural area close to where they work and where their community is really strong. And they're managing that really well.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. And can you speak more to that when you say, have more control over their own infrastructure, or, is there anything that you could see through this rules process that could help with that issue?
Well, if they're able to establish more community systems, if they have a well system or a type of sewer system that their community would be able to use. Also, the potential to hook up and connect to city services. That happened in parts of Marion County for our unincorporated community a long time ago, but it hasn't happened recently. But there's a real benefit to a relatively simple way of providing that service to an unincorporated community that's relatively dense and full of jobs and people that also provides that kind of housing. So just more flexibility, different types of options that go beyond just what Goal 11 could allow easily.
All right, thanks, Brandon. Okay, other thoughts on, what you think needs to be in place, or what characteristics are important to think about in bringing potential housing into areas? Yeah, Mary Kyle.
Well, I think echoing most of what Brandon was just talking about, but an assessment of the current infrastructure capacity, because as John noted, the existing rule already allows any density of housing. So there's nothing preventing now that is in terms of that, except the infrastructure potentially. And so there would need to be the infrastructure capacity as well as a need for more housing. So both, is there a need for more housing to serve that rural area, as Brandon described in Marion County for farm workers? Is there a need for more housing to serve the needs of the rural area, and is there the infrastructure to support it? And I think we need to look beyond just whether there's a community water system or a sewer system or septic systems, wells, et cetera, but also in the area around the rural community. What are the roads like? Is it in a high wildfire area? Is it an area that is in a consistent drought declaration? Those other things that may impact the long-term viability and sustainability of that community. I'm not sure, so maybe this is something the staff can come back with, what the land use planning program could do to address what Brandon raised as more control over the establishment of community water systems. I'm not sure if that's a land use thing. I think there's lots of complications, or potentially a lot of issues with hooking up to a nearby city's infrastructure, but that's a larger conversation. But in any event, the underlying issue is there the infrastructure to support needed housing in that rural area, in that community.
Thanks, Mary Kyle. And in the Salem office, anyone in the room there have thoughts they want to share?
I do have a clarifying question, but Kevin can go ahead first.
Yeah, I have some comments.
Okay, well, maybe
Michael,
Kevin, did you have a response to Mary Kyle that you want to share quickly? I think you're on mute.
Sure am. Boy, rookie mistake. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just want to clarify. So within unincorporated communities, it is the rules do allow, Division 11 allows for the establishment of community septic water systems, and that's fairly common. The rules also do allow for the extension of urban services to serve unincorporated communities. However, they're very strict about, you know, on the way to getting to an unincorporated community, those services can't be extended to abutting properties. So it's really restricted to within UGBs or within unincorporated communities. That has happened in some cases, but I will say, I mean, the costs of extending some of those services, depending on the distance to an unincorporated community from a UGB, can be pretty significant. But that is an option. In fact, City of Coos Bay is currently looking at potentially through a special process with the department or regional solutions process, potentially expanding the UGB to incorporate some unincorporated communities. Charleston and Barview are a couple that I can think of, because that service provision is readily available. But those are unincorporated communities that are very, very close to an existing UGB.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, back
We
to
do have a
the
couple.
Salem office. And just real quick, in the room, please do speak up. I think there was someone that had a comment or a thought. Or when I say speak up, I mean speak loudly, because we can really hear some people, but not hear others. So just assume speaking loudly is a good idea.
So as a clarifying question, and I asked just because this term is one that I think gets used fairly loosely and with a lot of different kind of flavors of intent. But when we talk about market demand, what does that mean in this context? Like, how should we be interpreting that? Because to a certain extent, like, you know, going back to the ONA question and how that ties in, right? That future housing need, that is market demand, right? It's the need of community members to have housing. Sometimes I think it gets defined as like private industry interest, right? And I think that's a separate question. But market demand generally, yeah, I would interpret as being people that need housing.
Okay, Michael Martin here with League of Oregon Cities. I think beyond the like sort of sharpening down into some of the specifics of the question, beyond just the lack of federal investment in infrastructure and how that nexus impacts ratepayers, I think a few things to look at. The long-term financial exposure in operations. I think I've seen from time to time, it's like, it's great if you have money to like, you know, expand. I think somebody alluded to like expand a pipe to connect to a community. That's good. But there's also that long-term, you know, inheriting the operations and maintenance costs, replacement costs, staffing demands, system capacity. I think there's also, you know, the regulatory burden piece. That's another kind of, you know, having to do with compliance obligations and those sorts of things. But and governance would be another like third piece of that, strictly related to expanding infrastructure. It's like, what is that long-term cost and responsibility as well?
Yeah, that's helpful. So not just looking at what does it take to bring the infrastructure in, but just the long-term maintaining and keeping that infrastructure up to date and everything that goes along with it.
Sylvia, I wanted to take a crack at market demand question. I don't know if we have a standing definition of that, but now that I think through it a little bit more, right? So if we were to have taken a deeper dive into the existing expansion possibilities for the 3 non-urban unincorporated communities, and maybe maybe the urban too, if this is all kind of tied together there in Division 4, servicing a specific rural use residential. I think there's language in there about camping, right? And so that's as it stands now, and frankly, I think maybe there's room in the next slide, the next question, to think through that a little bit more. But I was thinking to put that together, we can't impact marketing, but in that context, I think maybe we can think about how it contributes or should contribute to opportunity to expand some sorts of unincorporated communities. I'll stop there, and actually maybe we can get into that a little bit more with a little more relevancy in the next question.
Yeah, great. And so I'll move us into that next question on looking at expanding boundaries, unless there was any last thoughts. All right, yeah. So John, a little bit of background here, and then we'll turn it back to the committee.
Yeah. So again, we're not trying to state our position, or this isn't what we're promoting, but just some thoughts to maybe get on the table and get the ball rolling a little bit. So if we're talking about under what conditions maybe additional or revised opportunity to expand unincorporated community boundaries might be looked at. I've separated them into the non-urban, it's resort to rural service centers versus the urban unincorporated communities. And no changes, I think, is an option. We didn't want to eliminate the no change option. But in addition to that, and maybe this kind of gets at what we were talking a little bit about before with how does market demand fit or not into any of this? Could there be, you're looking at the left hand, what's on my left hand column, the non-UUCs, consideration for a new opportunity to allow some counties to plant some of these others to think about or plan for a long term, create an inventory similar to what seems to be offered for urban unincorporated communities. It is certainly offered for urban growth boundaries. That would be in addition to the existing what I call situational opportunity. That would be retained, but there could also be an opportunity, maybe, to think about a long-term need. Anyway, that's just a fact. Maybe it's a bad idea. If it's not a bad idea, we probably want to think about how does that look. It should be just limited to a certain type of these other communities. Should it be, limited to those with certain features? Anyway, and I also want to raise kind of the fourth thing there, the sensitive areas. I don't think our rules right now do a very good job of accounting for hazards, right? I don't think they do a very good job of talking about wildfire hazards and other natural hazards. And I don't think that was on purpose. I think that was just, it was 30 some years ago. So maybe that would be, I don't want to burden, I don't know if we want to burden existing opportunities. But we do want them to be looking at things responsibly. And if we're talking about new opportunities, then I think that really is a good time to say, here's the whole shooting match, that you should be looking at. And looking at the urban unincorporated communities, again, would it be worthwhile separating the opportunity, the language from the Division 4 stuff? Should they have to do both, I guess? I mean, that feels like double jeopardy to me. Could it make sense to reconsider the distance prohibitions? I don't know about that. I don't know that obviously I don't know what I think when I wrote that. But reconsider those distance limitations, or even the definition of long-term needs. And finally, would any of this make any difference? You know, would it make people feel more comfortable or less comfortable if, in some circumstances, the process was in the manner of periodic review, which is how we do most of the larger urban growth boundary expansions. Now, what that means basically is that the acknowledgement authority lies with the Land Conservation Development Commission. That's technically right. So how that works in process is that, and a lot of you are familiar with it. You know, I've been through it, right? So you do your work at the local level, and that's completed, and the decisions are made by the final local decisions are made by the local elected officials, and hopefully in coordination with the department. But then that work is forwarded. That decision is forwarded to the department, who conducts an analysis of it and makes a recommendation. This is where, you know, there's an opportunity for comments and objections, and, you know, kind of sort through all that stuff. But ultimately, there's a recommendation that we would make, and typically it's the director. Our director would act on that under the authority vested in them through the commission, and that would be an order to approve or remand or deny that proposal. And then, you know, if there's disagreement, then that can go to LCDC. What it does is it kind of takes the ordinary court system out to some degree. They don't go to land use board of appeals. You know, instead there's kind of the additional level of oversight with our commission. You know, some people think that's works pretty well. I mean, I'm sure there's other points of view. Nonetheless, again, that's how the legislature has determined their larger UGB expansions, over 50 acres, and communities over 2,500 are already treated that way. So that's more than anyone probably cares to know how that in a manner of periodic. But the short piece is that it really is the department and the commission determining whether it meets the goals and the goals ultimately versus the land use board of appeals and local jurisdiction. There's another element of review. Okay, so with that, well, again, I've got over my skis a little bit there. Sorry about that, but these are some ideas. These are some ideas about what this might look like, and we think some things are pretty ripe for consideration, and really be curious about what the RAC thinks.
Great, yeah, thanks, John. So over to the RAC, thoughts on maybe responses to some of what you see on the slide as potential things to consider to expand boundaries if these things are met, or maybe you have other ideas that aren't on this list here. I'll go to Eric and then Brandon, and then I'll check with John to see if there's anyone in the room. And
all
Eric?
right.
Oh, go ahead, Eric. Yes.
I'm sorry. Thank you. So yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap between questions 1 and 2. You know, certainly the conditions that would be necessary to expand, obviously adequate public facilities is important and it's necessary for consideration as part of a, you know, future community expansion. You know, one of the things that we work, I think the type of housing, as Mary suggested, is important as well. I think in our situation, we have an unincorporated community called Odell. There's a high need for workforce housing in that community. And so, you know, so that could be something that could elevate or be a condition that the people who work there, that there's a need for housing for the people who actually work in the community itself, as opposed to just being a bedroom community to some nearby, you know, urban area. You know, there's also a lot of need for different types of housing, whether that be, you know, multifamily housing, multi-generational ADUs, elderly housing, I think is an important thing to tackle. And it's good to note that there is no limit on the types of housing that could be provided in urban unincorporated community. You know, we in Hood River County, we have concerns with the the distance prohibition, and that's something that we're going to focus on. It certainly is inhibiting our ability to finalize a community plan for one of our communities, which happens to fall within a certain distance of the city of Hood River. And, there's a lot of factors that could be taken into consideration. And so we would look at it as, maybe there's a way to create a process similar to, a reasons exception where, maybe you are eligible for expansion, even if you're within that 10-mile or 20-mile rule limit, based on certain factors that you could use to justify that. Right now, it's just a straight prohibition. And that has caused some issues for our county. And so those are the things that I think that we're interested in looking at as this project moves forward, and some of the conditions that might be important for a community to expand in the future.
Thanks, Eric. Brandon?
Yes, I echo Eric's comments about the distance prohibition. That's a good example of something that could be looked at. For instance, say Marion County here, we've got an urban unincorporated community 2 miles from Salem. And you might think that just like a neighborhood of Salem, or it could be incorporated into Salem, but even though it's close, it has a very unique and different identity. It's really a type of rural living that's affordable, that people want to be in and don't want to be part of the city. And just because they're close is because we're a big county with a lot of ag activity and other things happening. So that set distance prohibition alone isn't enough to identify that something should be part of something else or be separate. I think there's a lot more to look at there. So I appreciate that we're looking at all these different aspects.
Great. Thank you, Brandon. John, just quick check in the room to see if there's any comments, and then I'll go back to the other hands on.
I think everybody in the room agrees with me. Oh, I'm sorry. No, actually, yes, we do have a hand raised here.
Great. And do you mind saying your name before you speak so folks online know who's speaking? Thanks.
Tabitha Eck, Mackenzie Community Land Trust. This might not sit under this question, but I'm not seeing a better place. 4 thoughts. One is there's a very big difference between 25,000 people, 5,000 people, and 500 or less people. So as we're talking about unincorporated rural, there's a huge difference. And there's a huge difference between 10 miles from an incorporated urban center and an hour away from an urban center. With that in mind, I want to just raise a caution about restricting options or changes to folks with only sewer or water systems. That's a long shot for many of our far-flung unincorporated communities. So to limit opportunity based on having a septic community systems, right? That would rule a lot of us out if that is a determining factor. And I'm seeing that being a determining factor with our county. And last but not least, I would caution about layering on restrictions or limiting opportunity based on fire danger. I'm a fire impacted community. Fire danger is going to be an ongoing reality for many people living under trees. It's a forever reality. We are seeing the impact of that fear of fire play out on our citizens in the form of insurance alone being ruled out simply because we have lived in a community that was impacted by fire. So I would just caution this not to layer on additional restrictions or limitations based on our true reality of distance from urban, and that we live under trees that are going to be on fire at some point, and we need to still be able to do this work not tied to a community system within the place that we live.
Okay, thanks, Tabitha. Maybe 1 or 2 more in the room if there are any.
+1 on what Tabitha said from Realtors.
Okay, thanks.
I would.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Michael Martin, League of Oregon Cities. I would just, Tabitha, I think brings up a good point in the sense that so much of this is like, what are the on the ground conditions look like and what's feasible. So I would just, thanks for bringing up that point. Yeah.
All right, let's go to Marcus.
Yeah, thank you. What a great discussion this is. There's a lot of things that coming from a rural area, a rural setting with all these bullet points noted. One of the things that here in Eastern Oregon, in Pendleton, Oregon. You know, we faced a flood in 2020. And with that, thinking about this list, we had to go and under our tribe, we assisted probably around 40 well and septic systems that had to be pumped over and over again. And it's because of global warming. You know, people don't, not everybody believes in that. But however, when we used to get 5 to 6 feet of snows, now 10 inches of rain. So we're constantly flooding. So I'm looking at these lists here about opportunity, or I guess limited opportunity. You know, we're at a point now where our board of trustees, our governing bodies, now directing all development to be moved up higher elevation. So that's the infrastructure right there, the high cost, along with water availability. You know, we work with the city of Pendleton, and then when they tell us, you know, we're at maximum capacity for water usage, another limited opportunity for us to not build. However, you know, we are making best with what we have. We are building a water tank, like 60 million. We're gonna probably start that this next year, I believe. So what I'm getting at is some of these opportunities aren't really opportunities at this time. It's more or less prolonged for us because we have to look for grants, look for millions of dollars, not just, you know, one lump grant. It's ongoing maintenance, as you all know, when it comes to water metering, you know, areas of interest and flood areas, which also bleeds over into maps. As some of you may know, FEMA's updating the maps, and that has really grown in consideration in Eastern Oregon. What I mean by that is those 100-year or those 500-year floods are now 100-year floods. And that also means, I believe we had a report about a week ago that's going to affect probably 40 to 50 homes along on our reservation. So what that means is insurance cost. So overall, long term, some of these folks are going to be moving out because they can't get insurance. So what I'm getting at is, you know, we're looking at opportunity, but at the same time, we're relooking at the entire system. And so what I'm looking at when I see this, you know, opportunity, you know, that's where my bosses are going to ask me, where do we fit in? Where does this opportunity on Umatilla tribes? So I'm looking at the water system, rural communities, public facility plans, all those are in question for us. So very limited opportunity. However, we are developing, like I was saying earlier, we are developing veterans, elders, rental units. We're also looking at assisted living. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at with your criteria is looking at for assisted living type facility, not for profit, but to help the community. So I just wanted to make those comments because I think this discussion is very valuable. And I'm looking forward to hear other comments later on when it comes to the comment period later on in a couple of months. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. Darren?
Yeah, thank you. I had two questions. The first was answered, which is the process and the ultimate sort of approval body for these UC expansions. But just a simple question about what's the universe of boundary expansions that DLCD deals with on an annual basis? Or do you know about how many have been submitted, approved, denied? Is there any universe there you can describe?
So I'm gonna jump in here and I apologize if I'm speaking over anybody. I can only see Darren. Great question, and it's hardly any. You know, in all honesty, we don't see very many. I was thinking about. I tried to do a little research, which was unsuccessful. I know for a fact that community of Kent in Sherman County went through it because I worked on that with the county judge and others. But it's not very often. And I'll also say, I don't know that everybody knows that there's a possibility to do it. I don't know that there's it's well understood that there is the opportunity to expand unincorporated communities. I think a lot of people think that they're picked in time. I might be overstating that, but the answer, again, to tie it off, is not very many. You know, maybe even a handful over the whole time.
Can I ask a follow-up to that with all the county directors that we have on? Is there a public facilities plan for all rural unincorporated areas? Like, I don't know this. Is it required? For all of you online, all the counties, for each of your unincorporated, I'm sorry, this is from Craig Carmichael. For all the
rural unincorporated communities, do you have a public facilities plan, an approved public facilities?
And so maybe, yeah, go ahead, Eric. I don't know, Brandon, if you have thoughts on this too. Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, in Hood River County, that would be, we do not have a public facility plan for all of our unincorporated communities.
Thank you.
And Gail.
Yeah, same for Clatsop County. We don't have those those plans, but we do have cooperation agreements with all the special districts.
All right, Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. I can speak for both Baker and Malheur County, probably even Grant County. Those that do not have special districts, there would be no plans because there's reliance on wells, as was mentioned earlier, and also on-site sewer or wastewater.
Thanks. And Brandon?
We don't have them for all of our communities. We do for Brooks Hopier. If you look at OAR 660 2250, it lays out when they're required. And generally, if it's an urban unincorporated community, you have to have a plan, but there's some other exceptions and components to it too, if you look at that in the code.
All right, thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. I just to tie it up real quickly, as Brandon pointed out. So the fact that that there may not be public facilities plans isn't that counties aren't performing right. You know, I knew you understood that, but I just want to be sure that there are only certain circumstances when it's required, and if those circumstances aren't triggered, then they don't have to do it. That's where a lot of them currently reside.
But I think there's something so interesting about you asking the question of the awareness and the ability to expand within, right? Like I've been sitting here thinking about the relationship with UGBs and then with this unincorporated area, and just even looking at Marion County. I got online to see if we have statewide maps of these, and we don't, because each county is supposed to be is responsible for their mapping. So it's just planning, right? And this invites a lot of great thoughts. And again, it is not a representation at all that the counties don't have, that each of these unincorporated areas don't have plans. It was more just a curiosity of like, what does this process look like when it's being established? So I appreciate all of you sharing.
Absolutely, and thanks for the question. All right. Others, any other thoughts on what needs to be considered in potentially expanding UC boundaries? I'm not seeing any hands, so we can move into the third question, which is really just what else? From anything that you haven't been able to say yet that you couldn't find a place to say and you want to share, what else does the department need to be thinking about in this rule update? And this is just opening the door, whether it's something you want to say about specific rule provisions themselves, or just more about values or what you hope happens in unincorporated communities. I'll just leave the door open for opportunity for kind of any comments here.
Thank you, Sylvia. Yes, please offer. And I just want to emphasize, this isn't a one-off deal, right? This is the only time we'll be receiving thoughts about these items. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if folks might want to think about them, chew on them a little bit. And so, as we progress, reach out. Sylvia will be hopefully be able to schedule some time to talk to you guys individually one-on-one, and maybe some other tools we can use. But we're starting. This is the start of the conversation. So if you think it's something you didn't get on the table today, let us know. We're always open to that. So thank you for that little opportunity, and by all means, I'd love your thing.
Go ahead, Mary Kyle.
Thanks. I asked this question before the whole RAC meeting started, sent it in, and I still like to repeat it. I think it's reflected in some of the things I've said that I would be interested in the department bringing together, and they may have to get it from counties, existing information on existing buildable lands and infrastructure capacity, at least in the urban unincorporated communities, because those seem to have the most potential for what we're talking about here. But there's probably also some rural communities that are close to that line. So for example, Deschutes County has done a full report in 2024 on the residential potential outside urban growth boundaries in their rural residential areas and in their unincorporated communities. And it includes some discussion of infrastructure capacity. And it's really interesting. I don't know if any other counties have done something that thorough, but there's a wealth of information there. And I realize it may be patchy, that there's a lot that isn't known, and some may reside in special districts that actually, run the community water system or something. But I just think to the degree that we have that information, it's really pretty critical. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mary Kyle. And maybe I would add to that, if there are any county representatives on the line now that know of information that could be useful for the group to have that's similar to what Deschutes County, please feel free to speak up about that too. Let's see, John, anyone in the room? Or actually, Madeline, and then I'll go back to the room if Madeline, you had a thought on that.
Mary Kyle, thanks so much for bringing that up. That study is significant in the consideration of how we think about counties and their role in defining need and expressing capacity. I know that was a component of an earlier question around the ONA methodology and how that's forecasted. So it might be something that we spend some time either internally at the department or bring to you as a rules advisory committee to think about what are even if it's just at a very general level, what are the criteria or general parameters around how counties begin to assume capacity. So is it truly related to infrastructure capacity of special districts that serve certain areas? Is it something else? You mentioned affordability requirements. There's been conversation about economic opportunities and how that drives need. So it just might be something that we spend some time thinking about and either providing what the rule already states and enhancing that our understanding of that, or if it's something further defined so that it's real clear for counties what might be required if that's something that either the community itself wishes to pursue or if the county wishes to show opportunity that way. Thanks for raising it.
Thanks, Madeline. And in the Salem office, any additional thoughts, questions?
Just one, and Lane County did a special zoning exemption for Blue River following the fire that I think is very unique in the state of Oregon. And I would love it if there was, I don't think I see any other Lane County people on the call. If you are here, please speak up. But it allowed for about a 2-mile stretch of old highway that goes from our school through our rural center, all of which was leveled, to have a greatly increased density, multi-use, apartment on the top of shops kind of a thing, much smaller lots. And it has proven to be the only tool and the only area that we could conceivably rebuild the inventory of our fire impacted community. It's not limited to 2 acre per house limitations. Our only limiting factor within that zone, from what I can see, is septic capacity. With this special overlay, though, we can achieve all of our economic and housing needs in theory if we can work within the septic component. I believe we're the only rural unincorporated fire impacted community to have this. So I think it's a case study that deserves a couple of eyes on it as it's still proving itself. But I would love to see that this extended within just 2-mile windows even Is it centered on a former post office or a school? But a tiny chunk around an existing community, something that justifies this needs some extra help, that gives a rural community the density, capacity it needs, and the economic component. That is also what did not recover from the fire. You have to have jobs to have houses and vice versa. So I would encourage some kind of case study around what Blue River did responding to that fire. It doesn't have to be motivated just by fire recovery. I think it's an option that could extend to our far-flung incorporated communities.
Great, thank you. I think, was that Tabitha?
Yes, sorry, I didn't introduce myself again.
That's okay. You're slightly off screen, so I wasn't sure. Thank you.
So I just want to say that I really appreciate Mary Kyle's kind of spot on. Mary Kyle's comments are spot on about my understanding. And hopefully we can assemble more data. We've taken a crack at some of it. It's been unfortunately more challenging than we had anticipated, but nonetheless, we're gonna keep trying, right? And, you know, knowledge is power, and every bit helps there. I couldn't agree more about the Blue River experience. I feel I need to know more about that. You know, that's a little bit personal to me, because when after those fires died down, I got in a rig and drove through there, and I was trying to figure out where I was going to stop. You know, there's a little store there. What's it called? That we're kind of ended that we're staging from. And I thought, well, I'll drive until I get to Blue River. And I drove and never got there. And I realized I'd driven right through it, and it was gone. I mean, it was gone. I don't know if anybody else was through there, but it was powerful to me. I mean, that community was just burned to the ground, all of it. So anyway, we want to talk about success stories or interesting lessons. There might be a bundle of them in that reconstruction story. And so anyway, I intend to look into it more and think it could be helpful to, you know, maybe share some successes or lessons learned at a future opportunity. So thank you for your patience and your indulgence. I couldn't hold it in any longer. So.
Great, thanks, John. All right, I'm going to move us into our next steps, but I'm just going to give one more opportunity to see if there's other comments that haven't been made that you want to share. Brees.
Yeah, the conversation around you know, Blue River is an important one, and I think something that I've didn't quite know where to drop this into the conversation. There are costs in all of these actions, you know, down the road, and I'm not sure where we account for notification of what those costs might be. And I'm being specific to cultural resources. You know, these are irreplaceable resources. A good place to live is a good place to live. And there have often and continue to be efforts to minimize what those look like. And, you know, this case example is a great one where early conversations after fire recovery about the presence of resources and how to navigate around some of those fixed points and what those steps are so that rebuild could be accommodated. So I think it's a good example, and I'm putting it out there as just a consideration about how, you know, something to consider in all of this, because wherever today new housing efforts might go, chances are somebody was already there historically, and those are going to be just part of the landscape, and making it clear that as a process, those can be accounted for. And, you know, with the recent Goal 5 work that has occurred, I think that that's a way of now bringing that process in so that it doesn't have to be a shoehorned in after the fact but actually looking at how that gets accounted for early in these efforts. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Bree. So yeah, early accounting for cultural resources in planning for new housing. Thank you. All right. Okay, so I'm just gonna go over a few next steps and then I'll check to see if I missed anything with the DLCD team, and then I'll hand it over to Commissioner Bennett for just close us out. So next steps, our next RAC meeting will be in early September. The date has not been set yet, but you all got a doodle poll, so please do complete that if you have not already. It's looking like the morning of September 11th is currently in the lead, so especially if that does not work for you, fill out that doodle poll. And I have sent out emails to RAC members to set up a one-on-one meeting with myself. This is an opportunity to, dive into more of the detail of what we talked about today, get to know you better and what your interests and needs are in this process, and start to think about what's important to you to focus on in this rulemaking. And those conversations will really be helpful in setting up future agendas and just making sure that we're running this process in a way that works best for you. So please do schedule that time with me if you haven't already. DLCD, did I miss anything in terms of next steps, things to share? I guess
I think that's where we're at. I think that's where we're at. I'm gonna and stop sharing. Obviously, we can continue to answer any questions. But I think we're kind of about at that time, and looks like Palmer had his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. I think I would add for the RAC members that if you leave a meeting and you have questions or you have issues that you want to bring up that you don't feel like got adequate airtime, please reach out to John and I. Or if you know you're going to miss a meeting, and it would be helpful for us to talk with you offline, either prior to that meeting or afterwards, please reach out. So I just want you all to know we're available to help you, and we really appreciate your involvement in the RAC, but everybody has busy schedules and you may not be able to attend every meeting, or you may not be able to raise every point that you wanted to. So you use us as a resource. Thanks.
Thanks, Palmer. All right, Commissioner Bennett, over to you.
Thank you, Sylvia. And right off, first thing I want to mention is thank you, Sylvia, John, and team for keeping us right on schedule here and closing this out really well. I thought it was extremely intriguing that a great deal of the comments were about learning opportunities and what is out there. I realize the unincorporated communities kind of falls in a gap because it's not really part of the league unless you have a new division for the unincorporated communities. And AOC, the Association of Oregon Counties, kind of has, but doesn't really directly have a piece for it. So this is really some new areas to be looking at. I want to encourage everyone to do their homework. This is a really aggressive timeline, and being prepared is so important. I can't encourage that enough. Along with that, I would really encourage you, as you're working within your respective communities, to share what the purpose and goals of the RAC are, and that it isn't really there's been a lot of confusion as to, I guess, the sideboards of what this RAC is going to be doing. And, if you do have questions, refer them, or if folks have questions, refer them back to the charge, and also just once again direct them to Palmer or John, or I guess me also, so that we can keep focused on what we're actually trying to complete here. Some of the things that's going to be challenging is there's a lot of complexities to this. As a planning director and county commissioner, and as a rancher too, I see that often here in Eastern Oregon, houses are permits are given for whatever legitimate purpose, and about two residents down, it somehow or another moves from that, and then all of a sudden we have the absentee owners that Mary Kyle referred to, and I have no idea how to limit that. I mean, and county planners have scratched their heads and just kind of threw up their arms, and commissioners too. So that's something that as we have this discussion, if we're designing homes or building for the rural needs, then how do we ensure that it remains for those rural needs? That's going to be something that the commission will really be interested in the RAC's conclusion on that. Once again, thank you. And I realize that it's a large commitment, and but it's really important. And I think that I was told a long time ago that we should be planning for 7 generations out. And that's what I used to tell my planning staff and my planners, and as I meet others, that not just for what are we going to do right now, but how will this affect the landscape and Oregon in 7 generations. With that, thank you so much. Thanks for your leadership, Sylvia. Thanks, John and company, and Palmer. And I'm looking forward to September.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Yes, and thank you all for your participation, and see you all in September. We'll send information out soon about when that date is.
We will. I hopefully not to. Stuff like people popping off is great. If you're going to join us on tour, we're going to rendezvous right out here in the parking lot over here. And Marion County is going to help us out. I want to give a big thanks, shout out to them. And stay tuned. Stay tuned, you guys. I feel really good about how things went this morning. Thank you so much. Got a lot of information. And yeah, we're going to be in a good position moving into the next one.